I'd like to welcome everybody to APCUG's Wednesday Workshop. Today's topic is learning Linux. Our co-presenter today, I'm glad to have with us, Or Beach. Co-hosting with us today is Bill James from APCUG. And of course, our lady with all the questions, Judy Tallur. So if you have a question, please address them to Judy. And then if you have a problem with Zoom or something, address those to Bill James. If during this recording, you for some reason don't want to be seen on the broadcast, you can just turn off your camera. We also request for common courtesy, if you're going to be having brunch during this from the West Coast, turn it off unless you've got enough for everybody. And none of us like virtual snacks. We want the real thing. We have a very variety of activities that we're going to do today. I'm going to start things off by thanking all the people who last month gave us some good ideas and topics for that. Please continue if you have a suggestion for another topic that we haven't heard about. You can kind of wait towards the end and then add that, because we're going to cover a lot of things today in the next few months. I want to start by addressing some of the topics that we might not be exactly covering and kind of explain that. One of the questions that we had from last time was regarding installing Linux on Chromebooks. And the problem with that is you're going to have somebody who's a Chromebook expert explain that part. I don't use a Chromebook, so I'm not going to be much of a help there. But that same question was brought up to a Chromebook person at a meeting earlier this week or last week. And it was an interesting comment that from the Chromebook person's viewpoint, Chromebooks can do all sorts of stuff that's up on the internet, things like that, and web apps. And the person who does do a Chromebook said that for a Chromebook user, if they were someone who wanted to do a lot more with photo editing, more than what they could do online, being able to run Linux on a Chromebook and use one of the many fine editing programs that Linux has to offer, then that would make a reason for a Chromebook user to want to install Linux on their Chromebook and access some of those programs. But on my side of the coin, as a Linux user, I would say I have really no idea why in the world I would want to run Linux on a Chromebook. If I'm already running Linux and have access to all of that, I don't know why. So that topic might be able to be addressed in the future if we have any Linux users who have an answer to that. Maybe they can join us. But personally, it makes sense for a Chromebook user who is limited to get the Linux. But for a Linux person, I just don't know why I would want to go to the trouble of having to install Linux on a Chromebook. Another question was brought up about VPNs, and we could talk about VPNs, but VPN isn't something that's restrictive to Linux. All cross-platform use VPN. So that may very well be a better topic for its own Wednesday workshop. So we may work on that, because there are a number of different VPNs to talk about. And basically, if you run the VPN on Windows, you do pretty much the same thing on Linux and Mac. So we'll put that as a possibility to try to get covered that way. We had somebody who talked about wanting to have some lessons about building software from source. And we haven't touched on that because this is supposed to be more or less a learning Linux. That's definitely not a beginner's thing. And the other thing I look at is that that's not something that Windows people actually do. When I was using Windows years ago, I never built anything from source. I just installed programs. And since we're trying to help people make the switch over, we weren't including that as of yet, because it's just so much easier to go to the repository or go to your software store, hit that button and download it. I'm sure the same thing, that more Windows people just want to go to the Windows store, click on the program, install it, and they don't want to have to go through all of that. However, since building from source really deals with the terminal, that in future we might be adding that into our terminal lessons. We're going to have a terminal lesson today, and then it also will blend into, if you can't get a software from your repository, or you can't get a packaged program from the internet, sometimes you have to manually unzip something and then try to get it into your program menu system. So we will probably add something about that, in the future. Somebody asked about virtual machines, and we talked about that earlier, and we'll probably be having that in on the July meeting. Also in July, I can tell you that Cal's going to be here from the Cajun Clickers. He would have been here today with us to help out, but he's at his first grandson's graduation. He'll be here next month to share with us the GNOME desktop. When we were talking about desktops, I couldn't find anybody who would share the GNOME, and it's one of the very most populated one. And so he's going to be here, and GNOME just came out with a brand new version a month ago. So he's going to be sharing some of the differences and that. And some of you may find out that the workflow that the GNOME desktop has will be something you'll say, that's what I like. We don't usually put that out for a beginner. We do something more like a Windows type desktop, like the Cinnamon one, or even the XFCE. But the GNOME one has a really good workflow, and the new one is very impressive. He'll be doing that next month. We also had a question about somebody saying, how about you demonstrate and show off something other than the big, huge Debian family? And we talked earlier about that there are some main branches of Linux. Debian is one of them. And from the Debian branch came Ubuntu, which is what Orv uses as a Kubuntu. Also, the Mint Mint operating system comes from Ubuntu and from Debian, and then there's a whole bunch of others. Well, there's another set of family that comes from Fedora, and another one from Arch. The problem is, to be able to present something about those, you got to know something about them. And that's not either of our areas. Orv and I are both Debian people, so we can show you that. And Linux is Linux to us. So if we want to have some, or to show off Fedora or Arch, we need somebody who says, I can help you out, and I'll share and tell you some stuff about that. The problem is that it's not going to be that much difference. And in the workshops that I do and the presentations that I do, I talk about, why are there so many Linux, and the relationship to why are there so many cars. The Fedora would do the same things that Mint does, or would Ubuntu do, maybe just with a little bit of different look. Fedora has all the different desktops. So if I fired up the Fedora current one with the GNOME desktop, it would just look like the brand new GNOME desktop on somebody else. It's sort of the same way with cars. How do you say to somebody, what makes a General Motors car better than a Ford car or a Chrysler car or whatever. They all do the same thing. You get in them, they've got the same tools, you drive. The biggest difference, you know, with the Linux is the package manager. How do packages get into your system? Under the Ubuntu or Debian one, we have deb packages, obviously coming from Debian. And from Fedora, they have a little bit of a different one. It would be sort of like, to me, the difference between metric measurement things and imperial measurement things like we use. If you have the tool that can work that, it works the same. So if we have somebody who would like to explain and tell us about why the Linux version they use, they like, we're not going to get into the battles of what's best and what's better and that, same with cars. But that's what we do. The same thing with Arch. Arch is a very big distribution, but you got to know Arch to be able to tell somebody or tell this group what makes it different than running, you know, Debian or, you know, Red Hat. So we can have those other kind of demonstrations if we have people who know them. I can't tell you why I do different things with Debian ones. I'm now on Linux Mint, mainly because I think that's what our club, our Linux group is switching to. But I went to MX Linux, or settled on, you know, KDE Ubuntu. It's just what you feel personally feels better to you, I guess. So thanks for those different kinds of things. There are a few other topics that we are going to be hitting in the next month or two. So we thank you for that. But I wanted to let you know, we are limited. We are not perfect. We're not the know everything. And so there are things that we might not present, but if we got somebody else, hey, that'd be great. So the word goes out. Today, though, we're going to be covering a number of those things that people had submitted to us. We're going to be talking about terminal commands, multiple distros on a single USB. We may mention the Raspberry Pi as your desktop operating system or replacing your desktop system, and maybe some more on the NAS software and a few other things that were on our topic for agenda. So we'll go ahead and get things off with something new today, really. We're going to switch things over to Orv, and he's going to take us through some command line activities in the terminal.
Okay, thank you, John. You ready?
I'm ready.
Let me see if I can mess this up. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon.
I think Orv hit a button. We'll watch for him to come back. He didn't say anything to us about any rolling blackouts out in California. Not yet, at least. Here he comes back in. And let me find him to make him a co-host. All right, he's back with us.
Boy, it kicked me right out when I went to share the screen.
Oh, we'll try that again, won't we?
We will try that again.
There you are.
All right, let me unshare for just a moment. Turn off my video. Better. Boy, that was weird.
Yeah, technology.
Stupid computers. Okay, see the first screen?
Yes.
Okay, we went through a handful of command line commands last presentation. I don't know if I mentioned it or before. If any of you are from the old DOS crowd, back then DOS had maybe 150 commands, and there were maybe a dozen you used routinely. Well, Linux has thousands of command line commands, and some are specific to applications, but you still use those same dozen or so commands routinely. We went through some of the more common commands last time. Going to extend that this time with some useful little command line commands. WC is word count. If you type WC in the name of the file, it'll tell you when it says new line, it means number of lines, number of words, and number of bytes in each file. I don't know what they call them in Windows, but when you have an option behind it, they're called switches or options. Word count has a number of them, and we'll go through them. And by the way, most of these screens you're seeing, the data is taken from the man file. Linux has a large number of manual files, and if you type man space and then the name of the command, it'll show you information on it. The problem with the man pages is they are extensive and thorough, so much so that they tend to be kind of unreadable. So you can look at the man page for any command you want. You're probably better off doing a Google search for Linux, name of the command, examples, and you typically find something that's a little more readable. So what I've done is I've chopped the chunks of the man page down to the ones you would use the most often. So anyway, -C or -- bytes prints the byte count. A lot of Linux command line commands are a little schizophrenic. You can use a single letter preceded by a dash for the command, or -- and some word or something, and you can see that here. Anyway, -C just prints the number of bytes, which is the number of characters. I take that back. Number of bytes is actually the number of bytes in the file, whereas -M or characters prints the number of characters. If you want to know how many lines in there, you just use the -L, and that's very handy. I've never used this one before. It's true. Every time you teach, you learn something. I never knew about the capital L. If you're concerned about how wide the maximum line is in the file, a -L will tell you the maximum display width and the number of words. Cat, which is short for concatenate, has a lot of different functions, but we're just going to talk about the most common one, which is sending the contents of a file to a screen. If you cat the file name, it'll send it to your default output, which is your screen. The problem with cat is it'll send the whole file. If it's more than one screen, you'll end up watching the last screen of the file. That'll be the last one presented. If you need to look at a text file, there are a couple other commands called less or more. I don't know if I covered them or not. Maybe we will. And anyway, they'll show a screen at a time, whereas cat will just send it all to the screen. So anyway, -B will number all of the lines except the blank ones. So you can get a line count at the beginning. -E, show ends, displays a $sign at the end of each line. And I thought about why this might be handy. If you have a lot of spaces at the end of each line, you can't tell because they're non-printing characters, but this will put a $sign at the end of all of those spaces, so you can tell if you've got hidden characters at the end of each line. Number all of the output lines, including blank ones. And if you don't want to see the blank ones, use -s. And you can combine a lot of these. If you wanted a minus s minus n, you just do a -sn. They'll let you combine them that way for those combinations that make sense. Head. If you only want to see the first few lines, use the head command and it'll print by default the first 10 lines. If you want to just see the first few bytes, you can use the -c. And if you wanted to say, for instance, 20 lines instead of the default 10, it would be head -20 or -- lines equals 20. I don't know why they ever use that. So anyway, if you want to say the first half a screen, you do head -n40 or something like that. And tail does the same thing, the last 10 lines. And it's got the same options for the number of bytes, -c. -f is follow, and I'll show an example of that because this is the one I use the most. And there's an example of how you would use it, except for the quotes. For some reason, when I put a / in the presentation application here, it insists on putting everything in italics, and I didn't want that. You don't really need the quotes. And -n is the last number of lines. So instead of the last 10, you could tail -20, and it would show you the last 20 lines. So what you do is tail -f, the file name, and it will follow it. In the example you can see there, I'm in /var/log, and I'm doing a tail -f of auth.log, and it shows the last 10 lines. But it watches the program until you do a Control-C, or watches the file. And if that file is updated, appended to, it will refresh the screen and show you the new last 10 lines. This is very handy. Put it in one screen. For instance, here I'm watching auth.log, which is the authentication log showing people logging in. There's another system log. And if your application has a log and you're wondering what it's doing, you can follow that log as you use the application, and it's great for picking out errors and stuff like that, or watching what transpires while you're using it. Sort is handy. You can sort a file name or sort a file, and by default it'll go to the screen. Default sorting, numbers first, then letters. Then when it comes to letters, lowercase and then uppercase. But as you would expect, you can change that all around. There's your sort file name. Output goes to screen. And by the way, it does not have to end in .text. It could be anything as long as it's text. You can send a binary file to the screen, but don't expect anything legible, and half the time it'll lock up your screen. So there's your numeric sort. If they're numbers or preceded, if the first characters are numbers, it'll do a numeric sort. Or a reverse sort that would sort it from, let's see, I don't know, 100 down to 1, and then Z to A, followed by uppercase Z to A, something like that. Here's another thing I learned. Apparently, it can tell the difference between the word May and the word June and sort them that way if they're lettered months. Or if you have something like 6/15/2021, it'll put that before 6/16/2021. I'm going to have to find that. So here's something that's more useful. Sort the file name numerically, and the right caret you see there sends that someplace else. In this case, it's sending it to a new text file with the sorted output. This is very handy. And the man page for this went on and on and on. So just Google the sort command if you want to know more switches. So the pipe command, this is the vertical bar on my keyboard. It's above the \, which on my keyboard is above the enter. It's called the pipe command, and it sends the output of one command to the input of the next command. In Linux, you may have seen references to standard in, standard out, and standard error, and they have numbers related to them. Standard in is 0, standard out is 1, and standard error is 2. Those are just shortcuts or aliases for those inputs. By default, standard in is your keyboard, standard out is your screen, and standard error is whatever log file that program uses. It will send it to that as an error. So if you're running a command called sort, it will send to its standard out, which is the screen, and pass it to the keyboard of the next command, the standard in. So here's an example. ls-l is list everything in /user bin, and if there are 100 entries, files in user bin, you get to see the last screen full. Well, to keep that from happening, you pipe it to some viewing program. You could use less or more. The difference between less or more, they both will display output of a file screen at a time, and you can scroll down through them with the space bar, one screen at a time. The difference is less will let you scroll up, more will not. So either of them will work for this. And Q to quit, by the way. Here's another one, cat demo.txt, pipe it to sort. Now, this is a little redundant because you could sort demo.txt, but this shows you that you can cat a file and send it someplace else. So here's a one where you string multiple pipe commands together. Cat duplicate.txt, sort it, and the unique command drops all the duplicate entries and then sends it to a new file that's sorted with all the unique, or duplicate, rather the duplicate entries deleted. I thought that was kind of neat. Grep is another one of those that has a huge man page because there are so many uses for it. Grep is the main command, general regularized expression. And there's expanded versions of it called egrep, fgrep, and rgrep, and you can look those up if you want. Basically, you can look for a string in a file, and it will display all instances of those on the screen. For instance, I have a huge random file called random_small.txt, and I grepping for the word to in random_small.txt, and in my terminal, which is bash, it flags the discoveries in red, which is handy. And in this case, there was only one instance. By the way, did you know there are websites that can generate large random files for you? Very handy. Okay, the rest of this, I'm going to talk about how you manage a second computer without having to move over to the chair in front of it or swing over to another keyboard. Back in the old days, the way you did this was a program called Telnet. A computer would listen for Telnet, incoming Telnet, and it would start up a login session if somebody telnetted into the computer. And you give your user ID and password. The problem is all of that over Telnet is plain text, it's unencrypted. And as people got more and more conscious about security, they came up with Secure Shell. It's just an encrypted version of Telnet. Because more and more people are playing with a second computer that's Linux, like a Raspberry Pi or a Debian machine, it's nice to be able to not have to get out of your chair and go over and work on that one when you could do it remotely via command line. And that's what Secure Shell is used for, among other things. So I'm going to go over some basics about how you use it. And again, Google has tons of examples. You can log in remotely. You can do remote command execution, which is cool. You can I'll show you how to do that. That's kind of cool. In other words, it's a combination: log in, run the command, and log out. So Remember how I told you that the man pages tend to be a little dense? Well, Secure Shell is one of those widely used programs with literally bazillions of switches options. And here it is. SSH, blah, 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 destination command. Fortunately, 99% of the time you don't use but maybe one of these, and we'll go over them. So here's some examples. You can SSH your username on the destination computer to the host name, or SSH to your username at the IP address. So here's an example. And this is me on my Linux workstation, W6BI-house PC, SSHing to a computer called SC. Now you'll notice I didn't have to put my username in. That's because it recognized me as a legitimate login user. And we'll talk about how you set that up. SC is the abbreviation for my wife's computer. When first started migrating her from Windows to Linux, she called it her stupid computer. Well, that's too much to type, so it's just SC now. And you can see that I logged in, and now I'm on the computer SC under my account. Remember, Linux has multiple accounts. I have an account of my own on her Linux workstation. And when you get done, you just type exit and exit the SSH session, and you're back to your home computer. This is really very handy. This is something people who use Linux use all day long. So let's talk about host names. And the reason I'm talking about Windows is because Windows knows about SSH now. Windows 10 has done a very good job of incorporating OpenSSH. And I'll talk some more about that. But it gets to be kind of a pain to SSH to an IP address, all that typing. You can put an entry in your host file in your Windows, so you can type a short name and it'll look up that IP address. The host file is found in Windows subsystem 32 driver, it's etc hosts. And you can edit it as an admin to use short names instead of IP addresses. This is the default host file. And they give you a few examples, and they're all commented out. The one that's rhino.acme.com is a good example. It's at a 102.54.94.97. You would add a line in that section with the IP address you want and the name you want to call it. And it does not have to be .com. It could be my Raspberry Pi or just RPI if you want, because this only applies to your computer. And from then on, you can SSH to that host name instead of having to use the IP address. So the copy command, and under Linux, the telnet equivalent of copy was RCP, remote copy, had the same problem as telnet. Everything is unencrypted. So if you're transferring a file full of social security numbers or credit card numbers, you certainly don't want it going over via unencrypted text. So SCP is secure copy via SSH. Here's how you send a file. SCP, the file name, to username and address, and the colon will put it in the home directory of the user whose name is username, unless you tell it otherwise. You can put a directory path under the /:documents or wherever you want it to go, and it will send it over there. To pull it back, it's SCP my name at address file name dot. And in Linux, dot means here. You could put a file path there if you wanted. So here's a couple examples. I'm sending the file random1.txt to SC. SCP random1.txt SC : and it will put it in the directory home/obeach over on SC. Works very, very quickly. Didn't even have time to run wasn't even a full second on the time counter. And here I pulled it back, and it's just SCP sc:random1.txt. And again, you'll notice I didn't have to use my username for any of them. And that's because I generated SSH keys. These are identity keys. There's a private one that's yours only, and a public one you have to push to the target machine. And the way you generate it is with SSH-keygen. And this is also on Windows. It'll look identical to this. You just run SSH-keygen. It asks you for a passphrase. Leave it blank. Leave everything blank. Just hit enter, poof, done. And then it'll be in the .ssh directory, wherever Windows keeps it. You have to put the public key over on the destination machine. So when you send your private key over there, it matches up to the public key and it authenticates you without having to use a password. You could SCP it over there, but honestly, I don't know where you put it on Windows. Fortunately, Windows has also adopted the SSH standard command SSH-copy-ID to the destination machine. Then you log in with your password, it pushes it over there, and from then on, you're password free. And when you do this, put a copy of your private key someplace, because if you lose it, you'll have to generate it again and push the new public key out to every machine that you manage that way. And if you manage a couple dozen like me, you really don't want to do that. So, Secure Shell on Windows, you have to install it as an optional feature, but it's there. It's called OpenSSH, and it gives you all the necessary commands: SSH, SCP, SSH-keygen, and SSH-copy-ID. A lot of these references, a lot of these things I talked about came from this compressed URL here, or you can just Google command examples. You know, Linux is wonderfully documented out on the internet. These commands don't change so much. If you're looking for something that's fairly new, like anything else, maybe kind of skip any entry that's older than 2 or 3 years. That just goes for Google searches in general. I'll do a demo here. Let me, we'll just kind of bang around. Okay, that's probably pretty small. So let me make it larger. Let's see. 14. We'll do 16.
Yeah, at least.
Is that better? Does it need to be larger?
Let's do it
okay.
A little bit larger for us.
I can do that. And you'll notice I'm not editing some config file. You don't have to do that in Linux very often anymore. Oh, let's go big.
Good.
There. Okay, let's see. Oh, I have lots of documents in documents. Let's tell you what. I'm going to SCP. Oh, let's see this. See this here? Let me show you something. I can highlight this and right-click and copy it. By the way, Control-C and Control-V work for copy and paste in Linux, but they're Control-C and Control-V, so you have to use the Shift. And you could do that, but let's use the Linux version of copy and paste. I just highlight it, and down here where my cursor is, I click the center button, the one that's under the roller mouse, boom. And I'm going to send it to SC, which is the computer that's sitting on the desk next to me, my wife's computer. And it won't ask me for authentication. Done. Very, very handy. Let me show you my alias file. So I've put a lot of these in here. If you're on DHCP, well, DHCP doesn't really apply here. And I actually have two networks, the 192.168.1.1, but that a lot of people have. That's just the household network. And the ones that start with 10 are my ham radio network. And this computer is rigged up so it can get out to both networks. The ham radio network goes out through wireless access points on mountaintops and talks to things. And you can see some of those end in pi. SW pi is the pi that's in the southwest end of the city here on a hill. Yeah, there we go. Notice I used less for that. I had to hit the space bar to get to the end. SN pi is the semi north pi. SE pi is the southeast pi, which isn't very interesting, but I can do something like that's SSH to SE pi, southeast pi, and run the uptime command. Oh, hang on a second. There we go. Let me do that again. Oh, I see what's going on. Let's do this one. Uptime. Let me clear that out. By the way, the clear command, as you would think, and I think it's the same in Windows, just clears the screen. So I'm going to SSH to this Raspberry Pi and ask it how long it's been running. And notice it doesn't log in. It logs in long enough to run the command and logs back out. And this Raspberry Pi has been up 75 days. Okay, let me go to my so these are some random texts I generated. They don't make a lot of sense. And one thing I noticed, the random text generator doesn't put carriage returns at 80 characters like you'd expect. I think it runs out to 256 characters and then puts a new line in there. And by the way, in DOS, at the end of each text line, you'll see a carriage return and a line feed character, Control M and Control R, I think. In Linux, they use a new line. There's no carriage return. So, oh, I should do that. There is a, when you send a text file that was generated in a Linux system to somebody who's going to look at it with a DOS viewer, they'll get real annoyed because there's no no carriage returns at the end of the lines. So there is a command called I think it's Unix to Unix to DOS or Unix to Mac, or you can do DOS to Unix and then just convert it, and it will go through the original original text file and convert it. Anyway, let's look at the beginning. Well, let's use head. That was the example we used. Head, random. Notice I'm using tab for completion. Tab. There's the first 10 lines. Now notice these are, there's no carriage return, so it's just junk characters. So we could do grep, say letter, random one.txt, and there's only one there. There are 26 lines. Yeah, and each line in this particular text file is 260, 256, 255 characters wide, something like that. Silly. But anyway, unless there are any questions, the commands themselves are simple. They can be strung together to be really, really complicated. If you're going to do routine management of a Linux machine, I encourage you to learn SSH from Windows, or you can do it from Linux to, you can't SSH into a Windows box, I don't think. Or maybe you could. I don't have it set up. Oh, here, let me show you this. Where is it? This is a Vnc session. I'm going to log into my Windows box, which is out in my ham Radio Shack. And you can see it's busy running ham radio applications. By the way, this is a VM. This is a Windows 10 VM running on a Linux box. Here's the command line. And you know, I could so I logged from the Windows back onto the Linux machine I'm giving this demonstration on. So you can see that SSH works fine on Windows. Let me get rid of that. I'm gonna, John, do you want to open it up for questions now or do something later?
If Judy has anything that really needs to be addressed right now, she'll give it to us. And if not, she'll hold it.
Okay, I've just got a couple of other suggestions here. Murray says he's never used the Control C and stuff. He uses, the usual copy paste Linux center button trick, but it
Excellent.
doesn't work with Linux Bash on Windows. David Cunningham said, flip also works. So just some other things that go along with that, and the rest of them we'll talk about later.
Sounds good. I will turn it back to you, John.
That was good because in your presentation, which I didn't know what all was going to be, no, yeah, that's good. It covered one other one, because one of the other questions for future was, how do you share files back and forth? And you've shown us that with the SSH and the SCP.
Cross
And
that
you can
off
use,
your list.
Yep.
We'll
You
probably
can
have to come
also,
back.
if it's within your house, you can FTP files if you have an FTP server set up. And Linux knows how to run Samba, which is the common Windows CIFS protocol. So it'll look just like a Windows share if you set it up on Samba. I guess we could talk about that later, John.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Now, for the people who are really new, that probably had a little bit of spinning in your head, but the trick with the command line is you start slow, you start with a few commands, and then you build on top of that. And in our next session, maybe we can get Orv to show some more commands about where you would run to get information about your machine. So we will do that. I'd like to talk about the question about testing out Linux. We have people who would like to learn it and try it out, but they don't want to take a chance on doing anything to their current operating system. We've talked about, well, there's one way you can do it is you can dual boot and keep your Windows or Mac maybe, and then add Linux. I used to do that. I used to talk about doing that, but now I'm to the point where I don't advise that, for the fact that sometimes an update to Windows will do something to totally crash your booting up stuff. And we have people who, they either can't get into Windows anymore, or they can't get to Linux anymore. So unless you really had a reason that you needed to do that, and you were willing to take that risk that, sometimes that'll change, we are really pushing the live. You can do it either the web version that we learned about a number of times ago from Distro Test, where you can, a little bit slower because you're going over the internet, try out different versions of Linux. And I tried one. Hey, it wasn't too bad, but you're still dependent on your internet connection. The other way is through our system of live Linuxes. And in the beginning, it was always on a disk, started out with CDs, and then Linux distributions got too big for a CD and went to a DVD. And not that this Linux disks or Linux operating systems are that much bigger than a DVD, but all of technology, you know, we've kind of moved on to thumb drives and streaming. So you can burn the ISO onto a thumb drive so that when you put it in the computer, it boots up. But if you want to try a number of them, you're going to have a number of disks. And in the beginning, I have a CD album, probably with 40 or so live discs, because I can pass them out to people if they want to try out something. But you'd have to have a whole bunch of these around. There's a new program that has been developed called Ventoy, and I checked it out, you know, a few months ago, and it's amazing because on a thumb drive, and I can there you can see it on a thumb drive, I can have multiple distros that I can test out through a menu. And it is so easy in that I don't have to do anything other than, I'm going to show you this, copy the ISO. I don't even have to run it through a program. The Ventoy program does all the work in the background. So I want to show you how that, and I'm going to show it on a Windows machine because since a lot of the people who are new to Linux are still running Windows, I'm going to show you how to do that. It'd be the same probably the Mac and and the Linux to create it. So I'm going to turn off the video and I'm going to share. And we're going to go to the ventoy.net website. It's ventoy.net, and if you want to make sure you get the English version, you do /en and /index. But just going to ventoy.net, your browser should know what language you're talking about. And this is really great when it came out. It's an open source, so those of you who have been attending any of our workshops and my workshops on software, you know how I really go for open source, and it creates more than just an ISO. And I don't even know, a WIM, an image, so it can create, and this way you don't have to keep reformatting the thumb drive like I used to do. Okay, I've tried out this distro, now I want to try another one. Okay, got to wipe out and install the program on there. This one you don't, you just copy it over. And it's only limited the number of distros by how big your thumb drive is. I happen to have 128, so I can put a whole bunch on there. But my first one that I had made was smaller than that. The demo one I'm going to do is a 64-bit one. So, this is easy to get going. And so when you go to it, you go to your downloads, and it's kind of a trick. These downloads aren't the downloads. They look like they are, but they take you to a GitHub page. And so I guess they do that because some people might not understand that. So it comes in Windows, and it comes in a live CD, and there's the Linux zip file. We call it tar.giz. So if you go to here, it'll take you to the GitHub, which is a hub where you get stuff. Ta-da! And if we scroll down, you'll find here are the different versions. And so what you would do would be to download the Windows zip file. Everybody should know how to do that. Just click on it and your browser will download it. And then when you've got that downloaded, if you go to your downloads folder, there is your zip file. And then what you need to do is use whatever program you have that unzips. Windows will do it automatically. Now, it's your preference, but what I've learned to do is I always create a folder somewhere that I'm going to unzip this folder to. So I have created a folder called Ventoy. Where you put it is kind of up to you. So I'm going to open this up, and Windows Explorer automatically has an extract all. I want to extract it all. Compressed folder is empty. Oh, darn, because that's what I did. I'm going to let you do that one. Let's come back to here. And make sure that. Go to my downloads. It is empty. Okay. I did all this and I erased it all so I could do it over again. I forgot that I was going to start with this part. Okay, so again, so we just download the file and you can open it automatically. I always save first because I've learned SOS, save or you'll be sorry. And now it's done. That's a fast, if you have a fast internet. And so there's my file. So I'm going to select that and extract it. And then it says, you know, where do you want to do it? I've already made a folder in my downloads called Ventoy. So I'm going to select that. And we extract it. And the process for, you know, Linux would be the same thing. You have your other kind of a file. It's not a zip file, but it could be. And then you just extract it to wherever you want. All right, so now we are in our Ventoy folder. And in Windows, it's really easy because there is a simple ext file. Now, what you also have to do at the same time is you have to have a thumb drive. And you can see I have a file, a thumb drive plugged in. I already named it Ventoy. And it's going to say it's not formatted, but Ventoy does that. All right, so you have a thumb drive, and like I said, it doesn't matter what size. The more that you bigger you have, the more you can do. So we run the Ventoy program, and it is so simple, except for the fact that Windows doesn't want you to run it. So they only give you a don't run, but if you hit the more info, then it says, well, we don't know who it is, but I know who it is, so I'm going to run it anyway. And of course, then if you're not the admin user, and you shouldn't be, you do your admin password. And as we said in Linux, this is the way we always do it, because even though you could be the admin, you never run as an admin until you need to. And that's why it's so much more secure. And this is how great it is. It sees that I have a thumb drive plugged in, and it looks at what this Ventoy program is, and it's version 1046. And that's what I have. So this is also the update program. Anytime that there's been an update, I run this program and it will say, oh, you've got the old one, here's the new one, so update it. And it does not affect the ISOs that I have saved. So this is the first time. So we're going to say, okay, I want you to install it on my ScanDisk utility. And it's a 64 gig one. So I hit install. It will be formatted, so I'll lose everything that's on there. So, yep. And then we have a double check. Are you sure? Oh, they just call it a double check now. And we'll go real quick. And that fast, I have a Ventoy thumb drive created. Okay, so if we were doing a regular thumb drive for live CDs, we would have to run it through a burning process program, whether it's an etcher one, whether it's a, we have a number of different image burning programs, whichever you use, but this one makes it so much easier. So I have it successfully done. All right, so I'm going to close out of here. I'm going to close out of here. Now, I have already downloaded, so it wouldn't take time, a number of ISOs. And if we go to ISOs, I have 4 of them downloaded. I'm not going to take the time because everybody will be bored watching Windows copy things over, but I'm going to do a couple of the smaller ones. You can see that the G parted is small. And so I'm just going to send that. Send to, and it sees my Ventoy. And all I'm doing is copying this ISO. I'm not doing anything that will make it turn into anything. And the other small one, we'll do Linux Lite. But it doesn't matter. You can copy as many as you want. And when you're done with one, all you do is delete it off the thumb drive, and then you put another one on. Almost done. See why I said I'm not going to do any more than that. Now, if I go to my Ventoy DVD or my USB, you can see I have 2, and these are just the same ISOs that I copied over. When you do this to a thumb drive with the burning program, it switches from an ISO to a live bootable program, but Ventoy does it for you. Now, I can't go any further in this demonstration because if I do, we lose Zoom. But this, I'm going to show you what happens when I plug my yellow Ventoy in to the computer. You have to know how to boot to it. Different computers have different problems. Windows gives you a real hassle to try to boot to something other than the internal drive, but you figured it out what you're doing. Now, when I boot in, this is what I get, a menu of booting choices. And you can see that on mine, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of them. And there's plenty more room because it's 128 gig. And if most of things are 5, you can do math, 128 divided by 5. I could put a lot of thumbs on here. What I have done here specifically, besides putting a couple of ISOs on here or distros, this is my rescue disk that I can thumb drive. I can take with me anywhere to anybody's house. And I have a G-parted program, a partitioning program. I have Knoppix, which is a Linux that has lots of programs that can do things to work on computers. I've also got Rescatalk, which is a real big program that has lots of tools. Might look at that as on a different one. And then I've got a number of different Linuxes. I've got Mint and Linux Lite and 2 different Ubuntus. Sorry, or if I don't have Kubuntu on here. And I can fire up any of these. And so in the background, somehow Ventoy takes an ISO, which you can't run unless something happens to it, and I can run any of these. And if I get tired of something, like I said, I can toss one out and just copy another one back in. It's the program to have if you want to have multiple drives and not have to have multiple, thumb drives. If we could do this showing more, it'd be neat to see, because I can just plug that in and run it. When you dual boot, you have the same kind of menu that comes up and says, do you want to run this operating system or this operating system? And with Ventoy, it does it. So ventoy.net, and I saw somebody who can't remember who I showed. I don't know if it was Howard, showed me he has a number of thumb drives. This way, I now have just one, and I've got a whole bunch on there. So We're going to move on unless Judy has anything urgent to speak directly. What we're going to do now is that each of us are going to take some of those items that we've had, and we're going to address some of the different topics that were submitted to us. And Orv, this is going to be back to you for the ones that you're going to cover.
All right. I had sent these answers to the questions to Judy, but I'll walk through them here. We had talked about how a user only has rights in their home directory. And Dennis asked, he said, if malicious programs get in, then it can only wreak havoc in the home directory and not the whole operating system. Being new, I don't know what is even in the home directory. Can he elaborate? And I said that most Linux distros, when they create a user, create directories like pictures, videos, documents, and downloads. And if programs like LibreOffice, Firefox, and Chrome find these directories, they will use them by default. In other words, your browsers will download if they find it. Those can be changed in those applications. Those are just the defaults. Also, if you have LibreOffice installed, your configuration for LibreOffice will be in your home directory. Another user using your computer would have LibreOffice's configuration files for that user in their home directory. And I said, if in the unlikely chance user A downloaded a malicious program, saved it, made it executable, and ran it, which is 3 or 4 stupid things in a row, if it ran amok, it could certainly wipe out user A's files in his or her home directory. But as soon as that malware tried to operate elsewhere in the system, the OS would kick it out of memory. And he asked me for, here, I'll share these. Let me, yeah, he asked for an example of the directory structure. Here's a home directory in Ubuntu Linux, pretty much the same for all distributions. Notice I just did an ls-l, which lists all the files, but it doesn't list hidden files. In Linux and Unix, if you want to hide a file, you start it with a period, a dot, and the L command, ls-l, will not show them. If you want to see all of them, it's ls-al, A-L. Here, let me show you that. I'm in my home directory. Let's see what kind of garbage I have in mine. Yeah. You can see blue is directories. Images are purple. White is files. Greens are executables. But if I do an ls-al to show all of them, you can see the dots. Those are the directories, like the .ssh directory there is hidden because you don't normally need to see it. If you do need to see it, use the -a command. Let me go back to my mail. Where's the mail here? Oh, you wanted to see the file manager. Let me go back to my home directory. And this is what, here. By the way, you can size all those folders so you can see more. Very handy. There's the folder view. And again, it doesn't show hidden files. There's a little more descriptive, a little more dense. And there's your standard, list. And again, you can size these and make them big or small if you want. Explain the difference between a Windows directory structure and a Linux structure. There really isn't any. The difference is Linux doesn't use letters, drive letters. It just uses paths. The top level directory in Windows is usually C:, and Linux, it's the /, which is called root, which is the same name as the admin account, which is really confusing. And directories and folders are used interchangeably. Alex asked, why not use the GUI version of rsync called grsync? And you certainly could. There's lots of commands that, like for instance, grsync under the covers uses rsync. All of the many of the applications that are command line applications are taken advantage by GUI equivalents, right? Reinvent the wheel. And Gail asks, how do you search the repository? I don't use the GUI repository too much, but here's the one from Ubuntu. It's got, oh, here, let me see if I can find it. Let's see, do I have it in my favorites? Let me see. System settings. No, I don't. It's under, let's see. Search for Discover. I think that's what it's called. I use it so infrequently. Yeah, there we go. Well, this is, you can search for applications. And you can search for a specific name. Like if I wanted to, I don't know. Let's see here. 3D CAD model, Lix, Midnight Commander. That's a nice little file pull. I'm going to install Telegram. That's a chat. See, it's going to ask me for my password because it wants to make sure I have admin privileges. You can see it's downloading, installing. %, done. All done. That was hard. Asked about VM.
Before we go on to those, what I was referring to was that you were going to talk about the Raspberry Pi and NAS software.
Oh, okay.
Using the Raspberry Pi as the desktop replacement.
Okay. Let's talk about the Raspberry Pi. I do have a Raspberry Pi 4. Actually, I have several of them. And by the way, for best performance for a Raspberry Pi 4, you'll want to get an external USB drive and not run it off the SD card. It's gotten a lot easier to set that up now. Even the Raspberry Pi 4 supports it. I got one 8 gigs of RAM and I put Ubuntu on it, which I like, and it works. It's just a little too leisurely for what I want. So I went to something a little bit more powerful, a compact Dell Optiplex I bought, surplus. In fact, I think somebody gave it to me. But Raspberry Pis run fine. I'm not currently running one as a desktop. I have, I don't know, half a dozen of them running as servers. Oh, and you wanted to know about the NAS? We can do that.
Yeah, because somebody asked about like the Freenas and.
Oh yeah, and I did respond. Freenas. Oh, here. I did write that up here. Freenas has gotten a lot more streamlined since I looked at it. It's all GUI applications. There's a Freenas and one other one I can't remember, but the screenshots are great. Thought they had some screenshots here. Well, here, we can do this. Get some pictures. Yeah. Oh, TrueNAS is the other one. So you can see that it's all GUI based. And if you're a little worried about running it, IX Systems does support for it. It's free to download and install. All of them are. But if you want some support, you can get support from IX Systems, at least for FreeNAS. My comment about those are, it's great to have a NAS, but if you put just one disk drive on it, you have the same problem you have with storing files on a computer. If the disk goes south, your files are gone. So you'll want to, if you want to build it up yourself, put a computer together, some old a thing with lots of drive storage in it. Make sure you have a fairly current motherboard in it and some RAM, and put at least 2, if not 3 drives in there. 2 you can mirror, with 3 you can start doing RAID 5 or even better. But what you use as software is less important for a server than the hardware you run it on in this case. I don't know if that answers questions or not. This is my,
I would say, I think so.
this is just,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just say, this is my Synology NAS. I bought it, I don't know, $600 or something. 2 3 terabyte drives, and I'm using, what am I using here? 18%. I don't store videos, which are the biggest file hogs, but there are 36,000 pictures on it. So I've only used not even half a terabyte, so it works fine. My only knock against the Synology is the UI is a little leisurely, but other than that, it works fine. We store everything to it. We don't store any important files on any of the workstations or the laptops, on the laptops or workstations themselves. It all goes to the NAS.
Yeah, I think the question probably came from last time when you demonstrated, the Synology and the price tag, and I think people are wondering, well, is it possible to make a NAS yourself and use a program like the Freenas or the other one that they mentioned, instead of going the.
It absolutely is, and if you like tinkering with hardware, it's absolutely fine. I would buy I would put in one of the canned ones like Freenas or TrueNAS rather than try and build up a Linux box as a server, because they pre-configure a lot of the stuff that, if you're not familiar with NAS and file storage, I mean, a lot of them now are using ZFS for file storage. It's a wonderful file system, fully featured. Oh boy, at the command line, it can be intimidating if you don't know anything about slivers.
Slivers? They're getting my finger.
Yeah. Well, they got some other place when I was working with them, but we won't go there.
Okay. All right. I think you said we were going to put off till next time, maybe talking about running Windows programs in Linux. We'll save that.
Oh, on Wine? Yeah. Well, I'll have to research that. I don't, nowadays, 99% of the stuff I want to do, I can do under Linux. But we'll look over Wine HQ and try and do a few installs and see what happens.
Okay, so that was a question. We'll talk about it. And a lot of us agree that way. I'm running Linux. It has everything that I need to use. So
the only thing I run Windows for is some very specialized ham radio programs. And I heard recently that they're going to make those multi-platform. So I'm a happy camper.
Perfect. And the only reason I'm using Windows is because so far there's not a good version of this multi-person action Star Wars, the Old Republic game that I play with my older son. So I've tried to do it. It doesn't quite work on Linux or even in Wine. All right. We'll come back to some more of these questions that you've submitted today, but we're trying to kind of hit the ones from last time. Look at my notes here. One of the things that people have asked, and we're going to come, we've mentioned it before, but coming back to it, because as we are very happy, we get some new people coming in late. And one of the questions is that we talk about the release cycles for Linux. And we know that the Linuxes are built up into an operating system. During the time, there are some updates to programs that people have made that your computer updates. But in terms of what we remember in the Windows world, we had Windows 3.1 and 11, and we had Windows 95. We don't talk about me, Windows 7. That was their old release cycle. And then we went from 7 to 8 and then skipped over 9 and went to 10. And then 10, they said it was going to be it. But 10 updates, it has now a 6-month release cycle that just came out, last month. There's another one coming out in the fall. And those are just kind of updates. And we call these kind of updates rolling releases. And we have a number of Linux that are rolling release distributions, which means you install it once and you should never have to install it again, because it's always updating. And it's not on kind of a 6-month time period. It's daily, weekly. You're always getting the brand new, off the press versions of everything. A lot of people, when they choose Linux, they want the most up-to-date, current, everything. And they run Arch, because Arch does that. The one little drawback is that because you get it right away when it's brand new and it's updated, once in a while, you could have a glitch. And then when you get the glitch, then you kind of have to work on fixing it. Sometimes the glitch is bad enough that your computer won't boot up anymore. Sometimes it's small that something doesn't run right. And then you have to go out and get help in fixing that. But there are people who want most up-to-date, cutting edge, and that's a rolling release. Then you have some Linux distributions that are on a scheduled release. We have some that are on a 6-month. The Ubuntu family that Orv uses is a 6-month. They come out every 6 months in April and in October. So we've been in the Ubuntu world, everything is the year and .4 or .10. And so every 6 months, a new version comes out for them. And that also filters down that any distro that's based on Ubuntu, they update maybe every 6 months.
Hey, John?
Yeah.
You might want to mention that in between those 6-month implementations, you get a steady stream of patches and enhancements.
Correct. Yeah. Security ones are always coming out when needed. And that. Then you might take a distribution like Fedora, and Fedora usually goes on a 12-month rotation. So once a year, Fedora gets a big update. Now, businesses don't like things changing that well because they've got software that's running, and your distribution in 6 months might change something new, and oops, it doesn't work right with your software problems. So businesses and individuals, there are some of us who like more stability, and we go with what's called LTS, long-term support. And these can be distribution or versions of Linux that are supported completely, and you can run them from anywhere from 3 to 5 years. The normal is 5 years. Ubuntu goes 5 years. Mint goes, I think, 5 years. Some of the other Ubuntus are on a 3-year cycle, so they don't go the full 5. And so people can get those and say, okay, good, I've got it. It's good for 5 years. I don't have to update. I get the security updates and some feature updates, but the main program will go for 5 years and I don't have to worry about it. And people do like that. Then there's the case of Debian. Debian's considered kind of the most secure of the Linux because a new version of Debian doesn't come out until it is definitely ready. So it might be a number of years before a new Debian comes out. Now, with Ubuntu and Mint, they have long-term supports that come out every 2 years. So even though the normal update for the Ubuntu family is every 6 months, they come out with a new long-term every 2 years. So every 2 years, you get a new one that's going to be good for 5 years. And so you get the one, and then 2 years from now, You look at the new version and say, ah, it doesn't have much that I really want. So you stick with that for another 2 years. And then after 4 years, you probably should switch, because after the 5th year, it's not supported anymore. That's what's happening at our computer club with our change. We stayed on the 1604 long-term Ubuntu. And when the 18 came out, we said, nothing really that great, switch to it. But now that we're in 2021, the 18 or 1604, it's no longer serviced. And so we got to change. So we should have changed last year, but nobody was in last year. So for users, you have choices. You can either have the most cutting edge, and that would be something like the Arch that does it all the time. You can go to every 6 months, every year, every 3 or 5 years. And that's what we call the release cycle. But always in between, there's always going to be security updates, feature updates. When a program that you're running gets a new update, that gets sent up to you. But the beginning, the base of it, what's built up from the ground up, that stays good for however long that cycle goes. Another question, and that came from a person who's new to join us, is I missed the early videos. I need to go back and start from scratch. So if you go to our website, apcug2.org, and if you haven't been here, shame on you. This is where you're going to get the tons of information about APCUG. But, don't forget, we've got the August 21st VTC coming up in 2 months. But we have access to our YouTube site. And if you wanted to type it, it's youtube.com/user/APCUG videos. But APCUG2 has a link to it. So if you click on the link to go to our YouTube site and you click on videos, all of the videos that we've made from our VTCs and all of our workshops are in this huge long list. But if you want to find the Linux learning ones, we have created playlists. So if you just click on playlists, there is the playlist for the winter VTC, and here is our Learning Linux ones. If you click on the playlist, you'll see that we have the first 6 here. 7 and 8 have not been added to the playlist yet. And you can come here and start back at the beginning and review all of our previous workshops. But they are all here. So the last 2, there's number 8 and there's number 7. Hi, Judy. And so you can come here. These are available to you to watch and whatever. But if you go to the playlists, don't click that unless you want to start at the beginning and play all 6 of them in a row. But there they are. And so you can do it. And if you hit the subscribe button, you'll get a notice that says we've added a new to our playlist. So that's how you find it, by going here. And if you go here, you can also find all the other things of APCUG. Okay, that's off of my list. And I got a couple more things depending on when we get done with Judy's list. So at this time, I'm going to turn things over to our lady with the questions, and then we can answer other questions and open up later for discussion. So Judy.
Okay. ba, 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 ba. From John Mazur comment, he said you can actually dual boot Linux with a Chromebook.
And my answer would be again, tell me why.
Yeah.
So maybe
Oh,
somebody will.
Stop. Hey, I put something in there that said learn how to use Linux on the Chromebook, okay, and make use of .com article. So,
Right. Well, and I'd say just learn to use Linux.
you know. Dennis says, regarding command, this is for ORF, regarding command line commands, do all caps, Linux versions recognize the same commands, or are there many commands that are specific to a particular Linux version?
The former, not the latter. Because all of those utilities, the vast majority of those utilities are part of the GNU project. GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix. They maintain all of those utilities and they're available for free to all Linuxes and Unixes. Most of the commercial Unixes install them also.
Yeah.
Okay, from
I think,
John.
well, wait, there's a add on to that. What we would say is that there would be the difference would be in that if I would switch to Arch or to Fedora, I would have to learn a few different commands, especially for the package manager to run that, because
Yes.
that's what distinguishes. But there are general commands that are good for everybody, and then there might be some specific ones for the distro you're working. So that's why I stay with Debian, because I'm learning that one. And it's not that I couldn't learn the other ones, but hey, I got enough to learn. Go ahead, Judy.
Okay. From John Carter, these both are for ORF. Explain the difference between a built-in command and a script and give an example.
A built-in command comes with a distribution. It's basically installed when you install the Linux distribution. A script is basically what they used to call a DOS batch file. Scripts like bash scripts are like DOS on steroids. You can incorporate all of those commands into a program to accomplish an end. You know, not just one command. You could concatenate them, or you can do branching, you know, make decisions if then else, do while, real programming stuff. And it's not just bash. PHP is a wonderful, or excuse me, Python is a wonderful programming language that has a low barrier to entry, and it's available. I think it's installed on 99% of the distributions. So you got your commands, then you got the scripts that incorporate the commands.
Explain how to put a command in the background and then how to terminate a background command.
Oh, let's see. BG is the command. I'll have to defer that and do a little research. I haven't done it in a long time.
It'll
Judy,
be out in the Q&A you'll get.
Yeah. Judy, another answer to explain it as I do as a first grader for the command. It's the difference between I can go to the store and pick up a meal that has been all prepared, or I can buy all the ingredients and do it myself. So that's with the commands. You know, there are commands that are in Linux that you just run, and then I can build it and save all these commands as a special name, and it runs that way. So it's customized or already there.
Okay. Good example. Love your first grade stuff.
Yep.
Dennis says, John, Gary, okay. There are more than 70 models of Chromebook that are no longer supported, so that might be a reason to convert them to Linux.
Okay, that's different than the comments. It's running Linux on a Chromebook, because you can run Linux programs while you're using Chromebook. Yes, taking an any old device that's not supported, make it a Linux, keep it going.
Or when I go to a website with lots of text, I can type Control F and search the page for a word. Will the same command work under a Linux distribution, or do they have a similar command?
Yeah, we went over that. It's Grep.
Okay.
Grep space, the string you're looking for, and then the name of the file.
Okay, John, this is for you. Is there a version of this which will let you have several versions of Linux to run on a Mac computer? The problem is I don't know what this is.
And I don't do Mac, so I couldn't answer that.
Okay.
Maybe somebody else can later today.
Okay, Dennis asked John, can you save anything that you test using Ventoy?
It is very easy to do it with another external drive. We used to do that all the time with the CD because you can't save to a CD or the DVD. So you can hook up a drive. Now, if you're testing it on your own system, you have access to your own files when you're running these live CDs. So I could create something in Ventoy and save it to my computer.
Thank you. This is from Murray. I have tried to use the Linux method of copy paste by highlighting something, then pressing the center button on the mouse. This does not work in the Abutto bash terminal in Windows 10. Is there a way to get that to work that way? Control-Shift-C and Control-Shift-V doesn't work either. Any ideas?
I wasn't sure what he meant about Windows. It does work in bash. In Windows, it's just Control-C and Control-V. You can copy and paste between the two with some caveats.
So Control-Shift-C and Control-Shift-V work just fine with Linux.
Yes.
Linux
Okay.
terminal, in the terminal.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. In a word processing, you don't need the shift.
So in LibreOffice Writer, you don't, yeah, I can just do Control-C, Control-V
Absolutely.
as usual.
Except, Judy, if you're running LibreOffice on Linux, you can highlight it and then paste it somebody else to copy it, because the Linux copy and paste also works in all the applications,
Okay.
not just command line.
Okay. From George. John, have you tried Yumi as a multi-boot flash drive? Been around for years. Is it better, worse?
I have not tried that. I used to use a special one that was produced by like Ubuntu, it was called all-in-one, and they created a version of a thumb drive that could run multiple Ubuntus, but it was already a package deal. I don't know on the Umi, this one is just too easy just to be able to copy and paste the ISO right into the thumb drive and off you go.
I believe John Carter has an answer to the Mac questions. A Mac has Unix commands, so there is no need to install Linux on a Mac. But using VMware, VirtualBox, or Parallels, you can install any Linux distribution.
That's correct. I'm actually running VMware Player as my, we won't go into details, but yeah.
Okay, this is a 1,000-word question, John. Or no, this is for Orv. I'm sorry. Are you ready?
Go for it.
Got it.
Good, it's your question, not mine.
But you listen too, okay? Is Freenas available for Raspberry Pi?
I don't think so, but let me find out.
Okay. An instant answer.
Let me see what the hardware requirements are. Hardware requirements. Looks like it requires x86.
Okay, I don't see that anywhere else in here. And I'm going to leave this question for you because it is this long, because I have it in a Word document. And so this will be on the Q&A that we send out. And though, oh, that is all the questions I have. I do have a question for Tony. I believe it's Liznak. I would love to know what kind of lizard that is. That must go with your last name. And that's my one and only question. Back over to you guys.
Okay. Let's see. There was a question about adjusting time, and so I'm going to slip over. And a lot of the things that I deal with is things that are stop that. So I'm not two places. With Linux, it's not Linux. It's just normal computer operation. Because somebody asked about adjusting the clock, time zone, and things, and so all you do is go into, for example, here's my preferences for my clock, and it gives me, do I want a 12-hour, 24-hour? How much do I want to show? This panel app also lets me do the weather and the temperature. So you can see at the top, I get a little icon, say it's sunny and 70, almost 72 degrees out here. Also, I can set it up that I can have locations. So not only do I have the Newark information, I also have Henderson, Nevada's information and a calendar too. If I wanted to adjust in terms of the time zone, then that's when you run into your your control panel and time and date. And you can see here that you set your time zone. Now, this is one to show you that I can't change it on my own as an individual user. This one, because it would affect every user, this one requires administrative approval. So if I unlock it and give the password, and then I can select what time zone I'm in and change that. So it's kind of easy enough. It's really not a Linux thing. It's just your app preferences for changing that. The other thing was that somebody was asking about adding your DNS if you wanted to have a specific DNS. And again, that's not really a Linux thing. That's again a software. And if I go to my advanced network and my wired connection, and this would be very similar to what you do in Windows. You just go to your network connection. And when I go into the settings, there's my IP4 and IPv6. And right here, I can just add, and I haven't done that because this is a new installation and there's a lot I forget to do. And you could put in whether you want to do an open DNS, which is out there, which is what I do because it's open source, or whether you wanted to use the Google service. And most people do this because they don't want to be connected to their ISP's DNS connection. So they put their own DNS server in here and alternate number. And then that way they know that when they do a search on the computer, it's going through a specific, or they're going to websites, it's going through a specific DNS and not the owner. So again, that's not a Linux thing. That's just your app that will do that. So I'll cancel that. So those were just two little other things that were from last month's submissions, which we really appreciate because we've got stuff now for another month or two. And I'm gonna go over here and stop sharing.
A gift that keeps on giving.
It is, it is. And what our goal is that we want to be able to let people know there's an alternative and give you any kind of help that you need. Okay, at this time, we're going to go ahead and allow people to speak and ask. Remember, Judy wants you to use the reactions button and raise your hand so that it goes to the top of the list. If you have a question or you want to share with us today, this is the open mic time.
And I have something, you have the weather on yours, and we just got this wonderful widget that tells me it's 96 degrees at 11 o'clock, and there is a heat warning. I'm loving to see the warning next to it, which is, you know, mind-boggling. And when my youngest daughter was in Denver, I was always calling her at the wrong time. So I put two clocks together so I could look and see and, you know, and remind myself what time it was in Colorado. So those options are way cool as far as I'm concerned.
Before the computer days, I have a clock in our dressing room that is set for Vegas time. So I can look at it and know right away what time it's there. All right, turn it over to you, Judy, for.
Oh, and it's a iguana from Tony's yard in Florida, and he's 4.5 feet long.
Whoa.
Whoa is true. All righty. Orf has to leave in 15 minutes. So Murray, Harmon, Rich, and Dale, which one of you guys do you have a question specifically for Orf?
Yeah, I think so. I wanted.
Don't ask your long one.
No, I'm not going to ask that one. No, I was going to ask. Okay, first of all, I guess, yeah, for Orb, you know, the question I had was, you know, you talked about the copy and paste. And what I'm talking about not working is I have Ubuntu 2004 Bash on my Windows computer. Okay, and none of those things work, you know, like where you do highlight a line and then center click on the mouse button, or Control C, you know, from a line. You know, if I do, you know, some kind of thing, history, grep some line, and then try to highlight it, and then you'll paste it into a new command. None of those things work. Like if I try to Control C or Control V, it will either show an up arrow C, or it will just do the usual Control C and you'll give you a new command place. So is there a way around that in the Ubuntu Bash you know, system on Windows 10 that you know of?
So you're running an older version of Ubuntu, which is fine.
No, it's 20. It's 20. Well, 20.04. That's not very old. I mean, I'm on Windows 10,
yeah,
and I have installed the Ubuntu support, and I've installed the 20.04 Ubuntu Bash. So I have a Ubuntu Bash terminal, but you know, the usual thing that I do all the time in Linux is, you know, highlight something, and then, you know, and where I want the command, I center click it. Well,
okay, Orf, over to you for an answer.
So I assume, Murray, that it's running under Windows subsystem for Linux?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. What I think is happening is your keyboard, which is managed by Windows, is intercepting those commands and they're not getting to Ubuntu. I would do a Google search on that sort of problem to say how to pass keyboard commands to WSL.
Okay.
Because I've seen that you have to, in my VMware player, you have to enable passing keys to the VM.
Okay. Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Over to Harmon.
Wait.
You're muted, Harmon.
Okay. If you go to pendrive.com, as far as USB multi-boot, everything you need to know is right there. Okay.
Would you type that in the chat box, please, for me?
Sure. Now, as far as running Linux programs on Windows, SM Player, Audacious are absolutely the greatest.
I agree.
Okay. Over to Rich.
My question, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, my question is I had Mate 19.3, which, and I know I had some back and forth with John about this, and my microphone wouldn't work. And I put the new Mate 20.1 alongside of it. And my microphone works fine now, as you can see. But my boot order, I put it alongside of it. So when I boot, when I turn on the computer, it boots up, and I have to go down to switch down with the down key to 20.1. Otherwise, it'll automatically go to 19.3. And I'm wondering how I changed that boot order.
I recommend you download Grub Customizer.
And he's going to type that in the chat box later.
And then it's just a program that runs and says, here's all your boot options. Which one do you want to be the default?
So it's pretty simple.
Yeah, yes. And I had to do that because sometimes I'm running a dual boot of Linux Mint Debian Edition along with Linux Mint itself. And an update to Linux Mint Debian Edition put it back on top. And there's another way you can go through and go into Linux Mint 21, run the Grub program again, but the Grub Customizer program makes it a lot easier. You can also make the print larger. So, yep, Grub Customizer.
Okay, thank you. And just for your information, for everybody, it's about 102 degrees here, south of Tucson.
Oh, but Patricia Hill said in Phoenix an hour and a half ago, it was 102 there. I love it when she sends me this and says, what's the temperature in your place? Over to Dale.
Yeah, mine's just a simple question.
Good.
It seems to me there's a question and answer place where you're getting those questions. Where is that located?
You send a chat to Judy.
Oh, okay.
It's to the left of share screen.
Share screen.
Move your mouse down to the bottom and you get your Zoom menu, which
It
has
says chat. So you're just saying just chat directly to Judy. Is that
Yeah,
what you're
Yeah,
saying?
just click on that and it'll come to me.
Yeah,
well,
'cause I've
you
seen
have to pick Judy.
You have to choose me. Sorry, and then it comes to me.
Yeah, I've had Q&A
We don't-
also.
Yeah, we don't
There's
use the Q&A part. We think it's better because we can save it and do it that way.
Thank you.
Harmon's turn again.
Okay, as far as the ACES support goes, when it comes to installing Linux on a laptop, on the initial boot, you need to hit the escape key. Otherwise, you will not be able to install Linux properly.
What's that? What does it do if you don't?
It doesn't install it properly, that's for sure. And it's my understanding that Google has made it impossible by disabling something on the motherboard so that you might not be able to install Linux in the first place.
On the ASUS? Interesting. I have an ASUS motherboard on my desktop running, but that's not the laptop. I know that I have a problem with my Lenovo because I can't get to the boot option to be able to boot to the thumb drive easily. I have to go in and reset the boot order because there's something weird that the F12 key doesn't work it right, but that's a Lenovo. And thanks to Windows saying, here's how you have to build your UEFI and secure boot stuff.
So you have to get it just right. Just as you start to boot up, as soon as your initial splash screen goes away, you got to keep hitting the escape key. Then all of a sudden you get a boot order, and then you can install it from there.
Yeah, that's from the UEFI and secure boot that kind of stops that.
So you guys are being discriminated against?
Duh.
Well, I'm just asking. Over to Dale.
I'm sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay. Oh, shoot. 68 degrees in Vernon, Canada.
I would take a time while we still have a lot of people here to remind everybody that next week we have a round table. Everybody wants to be there. We have enough room. We just don't have snacks for you. Yeah. So spread it around. We need to have everybody there who is doing hybrid meetings now to tell all of us who aren't how we can do that if we want to. So that's on for next week. And then on the 30th, what did I say was 30th? That's, oh, robots for seniors and 3D printers. And then we are starting to know, we got 3 things set up for next month, but I want to make sure, spread the word, share that registration link, because we think it's a topic that's right on today, is getting back in for meetings, and we have people who don't want to be going in. So hybrid's going to be the way to go.
If you have your setup put together that you are going to use or you are using, would you please send me a list of your equipment and how you are using it? And I would love to also have the prices if you had to go out and buy new equipment, because many of our groups do not have a whole heck of a lot of money in their treasury and need to do the most economical setup that they possibly can. And I have received 2 so far that are quite detailed, and one even with the diagram on how it's all set up. So far I have 2 setups to share, but I'd love to have more, just some really simplistic ones. Because for, like I said, for many of the small groups, they don't have money to run right out and buy a whole bunch of stuff. And the sound seems to be the problem. That is the main problem. Video seems to be okay, but the sound is the problem, that people on Zoom can't hear the people in the meeting and blah, blah, blah. Do we have any more Linux questions for our Linux guru, who there's only one guru left?
Oh, no, enthusiast, yeah.
Oh, Murray's got another question.
Okay, well, first of all, I just wanted to add to the comment of why use Linux on a Chromebook. And I don't do it myself, but there are quite a few people in our Linux group who find that the Chromebook is a very nice, relatively inexpensive, low-cost tablet. And if you want to run your Linux applications on such a nice low-cost tablet, running Linux on that when you want to be portable is a very good solution. So that's the reason why some of the people here do that. Then the other thing that I have, and maybe this is something for later on, it's to do with the command lines. I didn't realize this until quite recently, but there's some of the options in copy, the CP command, is that you can basically do a copy that lets you copy all of the files that have been changed since the last time to another device. So you can basically use it as a backup. And I'm wondering why, I mean, almost everybody uses either rsync or even, what is it, something else like that, to do that, to do the backups. And I'm wondering why not just use the CP if you're backing up to a device that's local. And then I guess the other thing about command lines, we talked about duplicates. There's something that I use all the time. It's called fdupes, which basically looks for all the duplicate files. And this is especially useful when I'm trying to figure out if I have more than one copy of a photograph. And you can use that to find any duplicates and selectively choose which ones you want to keep and get rid of the other ones. So that's my comments, questions, suggestions. And I probably will have 100 questions for the future.
Well, we need to have few answers. And as I was going to say is I'm going to reach out to all the people within my voice, which if we're on a recording and be played over the internet, goes far, that if you are a person who is able and willing to share something regarding Linux, get busy, contact us. Because like I said, some of us are limited. I don't know anything about Macs and Linux, but our ORV has posted something. And each month, we can add some more on that. But if you have the answers, then share them with the rest of us, because we all want to know. So if
John Carter from the Prescott Computer Society knows about Macs and Linux. And you guys, we let it all hang out, warts and all here.
Yeah.
If you're afraid to give a presentation, you're hesitant, it's no big deal.
No,
We are totally non-judgmental. We just love to learn the information. And if you're not smooth, I have a guy in my club that he gave his first presentation to our group using a Word document. And I went, well, hey, wait a minute, how about a PowerPoint? Well, it was his first presentation and he didn't know PowerPoint from a hole in the wall. And he subsequently gave his presentation that he put into a PowerPoint, and my job is fixing PowerPoints for people. Taught the class for 20 years, and he gave it to Bill James Group in Oklahoma City, and it went seamlessly. He and Bill and John were at my meeting Monday night giving presentations on Quick Assist, TeamViewer, and AnyDisk. And they were, Bill had glitches. John figured out in advance his glitches, and my guy had his glitches, and John helped him out of the pinch. And so we just, I tell people at my group, we fly by the seat of our pants, and that's kind of the way it is here. So love to have you give us a presentation with stuff that our regular Linux people, it's not their thing. It's called members helping members, users helping users. Those old user group taglines that people have. Share your expertise and educate us.
Penguins praising penguins.
Oh, get real. And he didn't talk about, there is a penguin, a blog, so to speak, on APCUG2.org. Jerry Minnick has Windows, Android, and Apple devices. John has penguins, and even though I don't have a Chromebook, I do the Chromebook stuff because the two people that were going to do it never participated. So I thought the Chromebook needed to be on the website also with what's new. But it's interesting to know with the Chromebook that whenever there's a Chrome OS update, you don't see one thing out there about Chromebooks particularly, but it's all about Google's operating system or their new equipment. But take a look at apcug2.org and see what we have to offer. And Harmon has a handout.
Okay, as far as VS Code, it's available in Linux for people like myself who use VS Code a lot. Being I do a lot of website programming. Usually you can use XAMPP in Windows, but Linux has got the Apache server built in, and just figured I'd let you know.
John raised his hand to volunteer. Good job, John.
Well, yeah.
I've tried. That ship has sailed. He's another one that the ship has sailed for me. Okay, sorry.
Go ahead, John.
All right. I'm going to have to agree with you, John Kennedy, on the Chromebook. The best thing you can do with a Chromebook is to wipe the operating system and put Linux on it. So, why run Linux under some virtual machine on a Chromebook? It just doesn't make any sense. And regarding Macs, you can wipe the disk and run Linux on a Mac. I've got several Mac computers right now that are too old to be updated to operating system, the current version. So they got Linux on them, different versions. You can put almost any Linux distribution on a Mac because it is, if it's an Intel Mac. So we have to be clear about that. If it's an Intel Mac, you can put Linux on it. You can just wipe it clean and reinstall. The new M1 Macs that have come out, those are ARM64 Macs in particular. So if you're going to put Linux on those, you have to get a distribution of the ARM64 distribution of Linux, and there's very few of them. I have Ubuntu 2004, which is ARM64. I've got Debian GNU, which is ARM64, and I've got Kali, K-A-L-I Linux, which is ARM64. Currently, right now, I have not been able to find a Mint version of that is ARM64. But when it comes out, I'm definitely going to install it on my M1 Mini. So I've got several different versions of Linux installed on my M1 Mac, and I've got several different versions installed on my Intel Macs. I've got Intel Macs and the M1 Mac, so it's possible.
Good. Thank you. Murray, you another?
Yeah, well, it's further to that. I mean, it was really about Ventoy to know if there was an equivalent to that for the Mac that you could boot and basically run it live. And further to the comments that I think it was Jim just made, whoever it was. Yeah, I've got a Mac that I really like, except of course it's really old. And what I would really like to do is, at least until it stops getting security updates next fall, I would like to be able to dual boot, let's say Ubuntu 20.04 on it. And so far, I haven't succeeded on that.
No, you do not want to dual boot a Mac. It's just not worth it.
Is that right? It's too much trouble?
Use a virtual machine, either VMware, VirtualBox, or Parallels. I use Parallels, have been for many, many years, because Parallels specifically, it does things that VMware cannot do as far as hardware is concerned. VirtualBox is not as good as Parallels. So,
okay, can you put a link to that one in the chat, please?
So Parallels is the way. Yeah, I'm gonna. Well, I can put it in the chat, but I can only.
That'd be great, because I will try that, because I agree VMware doesn't work very well on the Mac for Linux, for Ubuntu. At least I haven't got it to work very well. But I'll try that one. Parallel. I mean, before September, I will either get rid of this Mac, or I love the display on it, of course, or I will install Ubuntu on it. But thank you for all the hints and the links you've already put in. If you could put a link in for Parallels, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. By the way, this has been one of the best sessions on Linux I've seen. So thank you, everybody who's contributed.
Your hand went back up again, Murray.
Oh, I thought I put it down. I was trying to put it down.
It was already down, so you put it back up.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Do we have any more questions? Or general questions?
And ideas or subject matter, please submit them. As you can see, last month it was good. We got a lot of good responses, and so that'll keep us going.
Judy, I sent the Parallels desktop for Mac to you in chat because I can't chat to everybody.
Right. She keeps the chat and then she puts it all into document.
And then you guys all get a PDF document automatically.
Well, great. I'd like to thank everybody who attended today. Excite me. I mentioned to Judy when we were talking the other night, when we were trying to get other people to do workshops, that we thought this would be maybe a one and done type, and we're now ready, planning for Linux 10 next month. So thank you for your support and your interest. And again, if you are someone who has some information that you can help for all of us learning Linux, please let us know and we can work you into a workshop, even if it's just a 10-minute quick something or other. It's not like you have to do the whole thing, but there are questions that I can't answer and or can't answer. So if you can, great. Okay. As always, we'll see you next Wednesday and the Wednesday after. We have 3 Wednesdays in July scheduled. And then we have our August VTC on the 21st. And hopefully we'll have some more. We've got some great ideas for future Wednesday workshops. We just need the people to help put it together.